Hi guys, it's Crystal. I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you guys had a good holiday, and it is so nice to see you again. If you guys are new to this channel, like I said, my name is Crystal. I do Canadian true crime or true crime with a Canadian twist. From time to time, I also do international crimes as well. Ones that interest me, ones that have been recommended to me, or ones that show the differences in the judicial systems. The best one we've done for that would probably be Junko Furuta. That highlighted the vast differences between a Canadian system and a Japanese system. So from time to time, I do that as well. But my main focus is Canadian crime. If you guys do have any recommendations, let me know. That's what we're actually focusing on for this month is recommendations. I was going to do it in November, but you guys know I got caught up in some stuff. So at that point in time, I just pushed it off until now. So if you don't hear your recommendations in this chunk of recommendations, the next time we do them, you probably will hear yours. And if you guys are returning subscribers, you guys already know how much I love you and how thankful I am that you guys supported me and that you guys were there for me and that you guys understand. I'm so thankful for all of you guys. Hopefully, if you are new to this channel, you guys will hit that old like button. Hopefully you'll subscribe. Hit the notification bell. It might work, it might not. And leave me some comments. I almost always say it, particularly about this case, because this case is going to frustrate you guys. Trust me. The only other bit of news I have is that in order for me not to fall so far behind and have to take a lot of time off, I've decided that I'm going to take 1 week a month off just so I can get some of my stuff done. I'm sure you guys realize that when I talk for an hour and a half and I've researched like I do, it takes up a lot of the week. So this way I can still have time to do some of the things I need to do. So today's case, it's going to be a frustrating one. If you guys do want to leave comments, and I love to hear comments, guys, particularly because a lot of the times you guys come up with really awesome theories that I may not have thought of. I love to hear your theories. So let me know if you guys do choose to comment, though. Please, no hate. There's already enough hate out in the world. We don't need to add to it. We're just here to talk. So hopefully you guys will leave me some good ones, because this case, it's a case. It's going to be really frustrating. There's not a lot of information about the individuals involved. So we're going to be talking about Gerald Thomas Archer today. If you guys know who he is, maybe you don't know him by name. Maybe you know him by some of his monikers. The London Chambermaid Slayer, the London Chambermaid Killer, or the Chambermaid Slayer. You may know him as that. Now, originally, this case was recommended to me by my cousin. She's not only my cousin, she's also my good friend, so she's my frozen. She texted me and asked me if I knew about serial killers that had been in Chatham. And I said, yes, of course. Charles Ng was who I was thinking of. And she was like, no, ones that were in this area, as in operating in this area. That had me intrigued. I thought that she might have been talking about Peter John Peters. He's from the Wallaceburg area. But of course, you guys know I had to Google it. And this is who I came up with. I didn't know that he was attached to the area until later on. We're going to get into it. There's also another separate story that goes along with this. The reason why my cousin was asking is that the Retro Suites Hotel is here in Chatham. It's on King and William Street. Now, King Street and William Street in Chatham, Kent are pretty old, and from time to time they appear to be incredibly haunted. A number of people have talked about it. Tecumseh Park is actually right across the street from the Retro Suites and that block on King Street, and apparently a lot of people see War of 1812 soldiers out there. I myself haven't seen anything, but there's a lot of people that have. So we'll do with that what we may. But my cousin was telling me that there is a presence, let's just say, in only one of the rooms, just one suite. And whenever one of the maids tries to make the bed or do something like that, enters the room, this person pushes them. So this is what led us to this case. I'll mention something about that later. So, of course, The story itself starts in the Forest City, guys. You know what the Forest City is. We talked about this with Dr. Thomas Neil Cream. It is London, Ontario. And during the point in time we're talking about from 1969 to about 1971. London was actually known as the North American serial capital of the world. Well, of North America. The North American serial killer capital. In fact, most scholars believe that London was actually the serial killer capital of the world at this point in time. Now, I know a lot of people are going to argue, because a lot of people have said, well, why wasn't it Toronto? Why wasn't it Vancouver? Why wasn't it Edmonton or Calgary? This is due to its size and its population. The population in 1961 was actually only 569. 20 years later, in 1981, the population hadn't grown that much. It was only 254,280. So really, maybe an extra 100,000 people. It really hadn't grown by that much. Today, there's 511,000 people that currently reside in London. To me, that's a lot of people. To me, that seems really large, but I'm really used to the smaller cities. It's actually the largest municipality in southwestern Ontario and the 11th largest municipality in all of Canada. So, I mean, it has grown. It is still pretty rural, though. It's the Forest City, guys. There's a lot of trees there. You can definitely tell on the outskirts of town, it still seems rural. And in parts of town, it still seems rural. As of now, the square footage of London is 420 kilometers square. I should say kilometerage. So probably in 1969, there might have been 300 kilometers square, give or take. It wasn't until 1961 that London started acquiring neighboring townships and adding them into its municipality. So at that point in time, London was still fairly small and it didn't have a huge population. That's why, because per square kilometers, kilometerage, and per population wise, at least 6 active serial killers were in London, from London at that point, from 1959 until 1984. 6 for a population that small. That's all I'm going to say. So, of course, for those of you who don't know, we're just going to add a little information. London and the Thames River were actually founded in 1793, so they're actually pretty old, guys, by a guy named John Graves Simcoe. You might recognize that name. There's a region, I think it's a little bit over from London, called Simcoe. It might be a little up and over. Sorry, I'm not good with geography, guys. And he named the area. And of course, you guys already know that London and the Thames are named after their English counterparts, so it makes the sense. London was actually meant to be the capital of Upper Canada at that point in time, but for whatever reason, they decided against going with that. I think one of the reasons why they wanted it to be the capital is because it is exactly halfway between Detroit, Michigan, and Toronto, Ontario. So it's a good halfway place, I guess. London itself is well known for its universities and hospitals. McMaster University is there, Fanshawe College. There's at least 3 hospitals. It's well known for its educational aspects and also for there's a lot of teaching hospitals too. And for, of course, its medical hospitals. These are, sorry guys, I'm saying a lot again too. Sorry, I'm a little rusty. These are the top employers in London now. They actually are. The universities and the hospitals, the schools and the hospitals are the top employers in London. So like I said before, in 1961, London started acquiring the small townships and municipalities outside of itself and built itself up into the city we know today. And a lot of famous people come from London, Ontario. Justin Bieber comes from just outside of London. I don't know, I had to add him, sorry guys. Rachel McAdams, Ryan Gosling, Victor Garber, who played Thomas Andrews in the 1997 Titanic movie, he is from London. David Suzuki lived in London for a while. Eric Lindros, Tessa Virtue, they're all from London, Ontario. And another interesting point of fact is Frederick Banting, the co-creator, the co-founder, I should say, of insulin, actually practiced a bit in London, and he did some of his research for with insulin in London as well. Just to let you know. Here's where it's going to get frustrating. So Gerald Thomas Archer was actually born in, of course, London, Ontario, sometime in 1932. There's no information out there on his childhood. I don't know his exact birthday, guys. I don't know about his family situation. I don't know if he had brothers and sisters. Nothing. I don't know about his education. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing. In fact, his story doesn't take up again until about 1950. At that point in time, Archer was around 18 years old, and he started to acquire a criminal record. These were not for particularly violent crimes. They were more on the petty side. It was things like breaking and entering, possession of stolen goods. They just said possession, but it was stolen goods, not drugs. And they also said robbery. It doesn't appear to be a violent robbery, even though I know robberies are theft using force. Maybe he pushed them, I'm not quite sure, but it didn't say it was armed robbery, so it doesn't look like he had a victim or like he had a weapon. Maybe he beat somebody up, I'm not sure. They just said robbery, petty theft, breaking and entering, and possession. So he started to acquire this. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Melissa Ann Shepard, because out of the blue, she just started doing these non-violent crimes, which of course we know led up to further violent crimes. I'm sure you can see my point here. I'm guessing he had a criminal record. Well, he did definitely have a criminal record. I'm guessing he spent some time in jail or prison, but I have no idea how long, exactly where, anything like that, guys. There was nothing written. In fact, the story doesn't take up again until 1966. At this point in time, Gerald Thomas Archer would be about 34 years old. And he started writing somehow. I'm not sure how the two of them met, but he started writing to a woman named Mary. As far as I know, Mary is also Canadian, but I don't know anything more about her other than that she was more than likely married before and seemed to have had at least one child. I know she had a daughter. And the only other thing to know about her really was that she was 18 years older than Gerald Thomas Archer. Regardless, the two of them wrote to each other for about a year. I think it was in 1967 when they decided to meet face to face. They were going to have their face to face first meeting. And at this point in time, Mr. Archer is about 35, and that would make Mary about 53, give or take. I don't know her birthday either, guys. Sorry, I'm going to have to say approximately for a lot of the ages. And the two of them decided to meet face to face. It must have been a really good meeting. Like, it must have been a hella good meeting, guys, because exactly 11 days later, sometime in December of 1967, the two of them got married. They must have really liked what they saw. After this, they decided to not settle in London, but instead settle in a tiny agricultural village at that point in time in Kent County called Merlin. Merlin is 20 minutes away from London and about 21 minutes away from Chatham. So pretty much right halfway between the two. And like I said, guys, it's very small. Today, Merlin only has about 750 people. Back in 67, 68, 69, the years we're talking about, it only had about 600 people. You guys are understanding. Very tiny, very rural, small place. And that's where they decided to settle down. It seems to be because of Mary's work. Mary worked, and she had worked for a little while anyway, at one of the nursing homes in Chatham. Oh, and country music singer-songwriter Michelle Wright, she's also from Merlin. So on January 29th, 1969, we're going back to London for a few minutes. It was a really regular old school Canadian day, cold, blustery, probably a little bit of snow. A 62-year-old woman named Jane Woolley was going to pick up her paycheck. She worked at a place as a chambermaid, of course, called the London House. Now, the London House was a fairly derelict drinking slash hotel that kind of catered to the down and outers. And it was on the corner of Talbot and, sorry guys, Dundas Street. In fact, the hotel was a place known to, quote, cater to the down and destitute, end quote, from the area. That's what was said about this place. So not in the best area, not the best clientele. But regardless, this was where Jane worked, and she had worked there for a few months. I'm not exactly sure how many. It wasn't years, it was definitely months. She'd been there for a little bit. She made about $40 a week back then, and in today's money, that's about $350 a week. And though she only worked part-time, it does seem like she was okay money-wise. However, I don't think she would be described as somebody that was particularly middle class. Doesn't seem like she had a lot of friends. She did have some vices. Jane was known to frequently go out after she was done her shift and drink at the various other hotels and taverns in the area. Her apartment was on York Street, which is about 5 minutes from the London House. Now, we know that Jane got her check that day. She secured it, but we're not certain if she left her house again after that and went out that night to drink. Doesn't seem to be any reports from anybody saying that, but like I said, I don't know how many people actually recognized her in the area. We do know that for certain she did make it home. She did make it to her apartment at some point in time on the 29th. Here's a reason why we know. You guys, I'm sure are guessing it. So Jane's next shift was actually supposed to be the next day, January 30th. And of course, she didn't show up for it. The hotel staff and owners were not concerned about this. They had a really high staff turnover rate. You know, it's a place that deals with people that are on the fringes of society, let's just say. People that maybe don't have many friends, aren't particularly looked upon well, things like that. So no one was alarmed, really. They had, like I said, this high turnover rate. At this point in time, they just figured she'd either found another job someplace better, that she had been scared off by some of the rowdier customers, or maybe she just picked up and left. In fact, I think they gave her job to somebody else, to be honest with you guys. They just thought she wasn't coming back. Nobody really seemed to care or to be looking for Jane until about February 3rd. At this point in time, her landlord had grown concerned. Jane, of course, like most people, had to pay her rent on the 1st. She usually did pay her rent on the 1st of February. There was a couple times where she was a little bit late. I'm guessing that by the 3rd, maybe she usually paid it on the 2nd or the 3rd, and by, mid-morning of the 3rd, without Jane being around, the landlord started to be concerned. It wasn't necessarily about the money. I think it had to do in part with Jane's age. She is 62. Maybe the landlord thought that she had slipped and fallen or in some way needed some help and couldn't get some. She became concerned. So she actually arrived at Jane's apartment on York Street at about 1:30 p.m. She did look around and she noticed nothing was out of place, guys. The door had no marks on it. It doesn't look like there was any forced entry. In fact, the front door was still locked. Didn't appear to be anything tampered with outside, nothing like that. She did try to get Jane, of course, to come to the door, and when Jane didn't answer, she used her own key and let herself in. She found Jane in a room that was towards the back of the apartment, and Jane was lying on her back. She had her knees up and slightly parted, and she was on the floor, of course, guys. And her clothing seemed to be, and I quote, ripped, end quote, from her body. She wasn't wearing anything except a pair of nylon stockings, guys. Although I don't think they were obviously pulled up. I want to say they were just below her knees. It was like the person had tried to get them off but couldn't get them fully off, whoever had done this to Jane. A pillow and a sweater covered her face, and of course she was lying in a pool of her own blood. She didn't have any other stab wounds or anything of that nature. And also the landlord noted that her pet Budgie, who she really, really loved, apparently, I would say that the landlord and Jane knew each other fairly well. But her beloved Budgie was also dead. Now, officials wondered if somebody had tried to do, or if the killer had also killed the bird, but it does appear that the bird actually died from the shock of seeing Jane being murdered. Jane's head and face were, quote, extremely fractured, end quote. She had been beaten mercilessly. We're not sure with what either, guys. From the sounds of it, it almost seems like this person took whatever he used with him into the place, however he could have, I guess, used his fist too. I don't think there was ever a weapon found. Her phone had also been removed from the hook so that anybody who was calling in would only get a busy signal and think that Jane was talking on the phone. It's old school, guys. You guys know there's no cell phones or anything like that. You had to use like the actual landline. And of course, at that point in time, no call waiting, no call answer, no anything like that. So you would just have gotten the busy signal and tried again. Now, I'm not sure how many people tried to call Jane in that point in time, and it was more than likely that the killer figured this would be a way of prolonging her discovery, as it will. Or it could have possibly been to stop Jane from making any calls, just in case she was still alive. I'm not sure, but it was taken off the hook. The only other real piece of evidence that police were able to find was an ashtray that was in her living room. Jane was a smoker, and they could tell because some of the cigarette butts had her lipstick shade on it, but some of the other ones were clean. So they did decide to bag up that evidence, and they did preserve it really well. So that was a boon for this case, but much later on. Jane's purse had also been dumped out, and her wallet, the money had been taken from, and anything. Her wallet was actually missing, guys. They had removed her whole wallet. It kind of will make sense later on because it almost seems like this person knew Jane, right? From the fact that there had been no damage to the front door. It seems like Jane invited her killer in and shared some cigarettes with them. It seems like Jane knew or at least trusted this person. Like this could have been somebody who showed up in a handyman uniform, maybe saying they needed to fix something, somebody masquerading as a police officer, anything, some person that seemed benevolent enough for Jane to open her door to. Either that or she actually knew this person. And that was a theory for the police at the very top. They figured that Jane definitely knew her killer. But like I said, of course, her wallet was missing. And like I said, it would make sense if especially if this person had been watching her, they would have known she would have got paid on the 29th and then of course snatched her wallet. Police believed that the motivation for this crime was rape. Maybe not necessarily that this person had meant to murder her, and then we'll get into that in a second. Just give me a second. So, of course, at this point in time, her clothing was also spread out around the apartment, guys. For some reason, it was just spread out around there. And, of course, the various articles from her purse, minus her wallet. So, police were super tight-lipped about Jane's murder. Could have been because she was down and out. And maybe they didn't have pressure so much from other people to solve it, especially family or friends. Could have been because they didn't want to whip people into a frenzy. People are already in an area where there are at least 5 other known serial killers, active serial killers. There were a lot of unsolved crimes at this point in time. Perhaps the police just didn't want to alarm the public anymore. And I have to keep pointing out, Jane was somebody that was known to be down and out, a frequent drinker, and didn't appear to have a lot of friends. Maybe police just didn't care. It didn't seem like number 1 on the priority list to solve, let's just say. But like I said, they did actually preserve that evidence. And I do want to say there wasn't a lot of other evidence around. No fingerprints, no nothing like that, guys. Just basically those cigarette butts. They did an autopsy on Jane, and it showed that she was most likely dead since the 29th. Could have been early morning hours of the 30th. She was more than likely dead for that long. And she had died from the trauma due to to her head, guys, which makes sense. They also decided, because the clothes had been removed from her, that someone had attempted to rape her, but was unable to. When they did the autopsy, they didn't note any signs of rape. They said that there were no signs of sexual assault. It didn't look like walls were torn, or that there were incisions or trauma or blood or bruising, nothing like that to her genital region. However, we know now that people can assault people, sexually assault people, without leaving huge wounds, guys. We know that that's possible. We also know that it's possible that he could have raped her after death. And it doesn't stop just because a male organ didn't penetrate her doesn't mean that this person didn't penetrate her with something else as she was dying or after she was dead. It doesn't mean anything like that. But regardless, they said there was no sexual assault. However, police believed that the main motivation for this crime was rape, and that the, I guess, murder and theft were afterthoughts. I mean, I guess it kind of seems like the person brought whatever they had with them to kill her, so I'm not totally sure. But at the same point in time, I'm going to guess that they assumed the same thing I thought. Maybe this person was frustrated because he couldn't sexually get aroused, and therefore took his frustrations out on Jane. Regardless, police believed rape was the immediate crime and the theft, etc., was done afterwards. Now, of course, they didn't know about DNA then. It's possible they could have been trying to blood type the cigarettes. I don't know. But there wasn't a lot of other evidence, like I said before, guys. There was really nothing else. And at that point in time, police couldn't be 100% certain that those cigarettes weren't from a visitor Jane had had a few days before. Although, like I said, it doesn't seem like she knows a lot of people. But anyway. Jane's death, I mean, nobody reported seeing her in the days following the 29th. Nobody even reported her missing, guys. And she was gone for 5 days. Wasn't until the landlady discovered her, right? It just doesn't seem like her case was paid attention to or given the attention it deserved. And very quickly, it became a cold case. Very quickly. My only other thing was, how did the killer get away? If the front door was locked, how did he get away? Nobody said anything about Jane's keys being missing from her purse or anything like that. Nobody said anything about her house keys being missing, so it doesn't seem like the killer locked the door on the way out. I don't know if there was a separate entrance or not. It doesn't seem to be, because nobody made mention of that. I don't know if this person was able to get a window up and then, I mean, it's January, my God, that'd be cold, and escape that way. I have no idea how this person got out of the house. Nothing was ever mentioned about that. That's an interesting point. I wonder how he got out. I'm going to assume it was through a window, unless he did take her keys, but like I said, nothing was mentioned about that. So at this point, we're going to go back to Gerald and Mary. Gerald and Mary were still living in Merlin in January of 1969. They seemed to be okay there. And Mary was the primary breadwinner for the family. She worked at a nursing home, like I said before, in Chatham, and it was called the Canadiana Nursing Home. My mom works at a nursing home in Chatham, and she says that she believes the Canadiana changed over to either Copper Terrace or Meadow Park. At some point in time. So actually the Canadiana still stands. It's just called a different name. And like I said before, this would have been about 21 minutes away from her. She also seemed to have been working there for some years, guys. She'd been employed at the nursing home for a while. I want to keep reminding you guys that she is in her mid-50s at this point in time. Gerald would work occasionally as a day laborer. It was basically, you know, just work a few days at a job, get paid, and then move on or not work for a while and blah, blah, blah. He was never steadily employed. It could also have been due to his criminal record, but to be honest with you guys, it doesn't seem like he cared to work. I never saw of a place that he really steadily worked at ever in his life. So I'm going to say he was more than content to let Mary do the work while he stayed at home, but on various days where he secured a day wage. This arrangement seemed to work for them, though. Nothing was ever said bad about their marriage. It doesn't seem like they had a bad marriage. Mary seemed to have been happy enough to do this. Could have been because she was 18 years older than him that she took kind of a mothering role towards him, unconsciously, right? Because that would be creepy, but kind of like a mothering role where she felt she had to take care of him. It could also have been her work ethic. Maybe she was just a really hard worker. It could also have been like noting the difference in their ages, that she felt like she had to work to keep him happy so he'd stay there. I'm not sure. Regardless, whatever it was, this arrangement worked for the two of them. Now, at this point in time, the couple didn't own a car. I am not sure how Mary was getting to work every day. Nobody said anything about carpooling. Not sure about that. I'm not sure if she took a bus. I'm really not sure. But at this point in time, the couple didn't have a car. And Mary wasn't getting any younger. It was harder for her to get around like she had. So the couple decided that they were going to move to Chatham. And they decided that they were going to make this move in October of 1970. So they got a little bit of time to get their stuff in order. On September 6th of 1970, a woman named named Mary Gray went to go pick up her friend and her co-worker, Edith Authier, 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 depends on how you say it, who was 57. She was going to pick her up for work. The two of them, like I said, were friends, but they also carpooled together. So it was a day of work. She was going to go pick up her friend. Interestingly, Edith lived in Merlin, Ontario. So she must have been driving through, and then of course they would go to their respective job. Edith, much like Jane, lived alone. She had been married, but her husband had been dead for about 13 years, and the couple had never had any children. So she lives alone and has no children, just like Jane. I don't know if I mentioned that, guys. Also, Jane didn't have any children. Much like Jane, she was also employed at a chambermaid. She was employed at a hotel called the William Pitt Hotel, which is now part of the Retro Suite, guys. That's why we're talking about this, which was in Chatham, Ontario. I told you we'd be going back to my hometown, or my home area, I should say. Unlike Jane, though, Edith was pretty well known. She had also worked at the hotel for approximately a year, so she was fairly steadily employed, and she had friends. Mary Gray for sure was her friend, but she had other friends too. Seems like she had been in Merlin for a while, guys, so she may have originally come from there. She seems to have known people from the area. She had friends. I think she might have had family in the area, despite the fact that she lived alone and didn't have any children. She seemed to be okay in life. She also had a more respectable job. At this point in time, the William Pitt Hotel was a fairly, let's say, middle-class establishment. They were well known for their musicians and entertainment acts that used to come in and perform at the William Pitt. So I would say it's pretty middle-class. It's not a low-class bar like what Jane worked at. It's a more middle-class hotel and drinking establishment. And another thing about Edith is that she was not known to go out and frequent various taverns, etc. after work. She wasn't known for that. So the William Pitt Hotel was originally a large hotel called the Gardner Hotel. And in 1929, there was a fire there. Someone decided to buy the property. And in 1930, they started to build the William Pitt Hotel. And at this point in time, the William Pitt Hotel was actually the largest structure in Chatham at that time. So it was the largest structure, largest building, and the most expensive, or sorry, I should say the most expensive building at that time. So it's fairly opulent, guys. It was nicely decorated and everything. It was opened to the public in 1931, like I said. So eventually, though, the William Pitt was sold and it was actually torn down. Some of the building that was the William Pitt is home to the mall. I'm going to call it the mall. There's not many stores there. The downtown Chatham Center. Some of it is the little boutiques and some of it is the retro suites. So you have the retro suites here on the corner of King and William. I'm pretty sure it's William. Sorry, guys. The hotel is here. And then you have some boutiques that are attached to it. And then the downtown Chatham Center. The William Pitt Hotel would have been in around that area. And the retro suites is it's fairly well known. It's a pretty upscale hotel and establishment, guys. So it's made a long journey from its start, but it's fairly upscale, and the boutiques that surround it are too. So on that morning, Mary knocked on Edith's William Street. She lived on William Street in Merlin home. And she didn't get an answer. So she knocked a few more times and then became concerned. Edith was, like I said, 57 at this time. So there could have been a concern. Maybe she had fallen. Maybe she was struggling to get up. Maybe she had knocked herself unconscious. Maybe she had become sick. Regardless, Mary became concerned and went to the police and asked them to do a welfare check on Edith. Police and Mary, I don't know why they let Mary do this, but police and Mary entered the residence and, of course, found Edith's body. Edith was not sick. She was not incapacitated. She was dead. She was lying on her back on the kitchen floor in a pool of her own blood, and this was beside the table. There was a notable blood splatter on like the baseboards near the table area, like the baseboards and the molding and stuff around the table, and also on the legs of the table as well. 3 butcher knives that were actually from her own kitchen butcher blocks, so weapons of opportunity at this point in time, were found by her body, and 2 of them were stained with blood. I don't know why the 3rd one was there. And they, of course, appeared to be the murder weapons, so at least we have the murder weapon in this case. Edith was stabbed 5 to 6 times, but not only that, she was actually beaten in the head and face region. You see, you're getting it. You're connecting the 2 crimes. She was beaten in the head and face region with an electric iron. So also another opportune. Weapon. It doesn't seem like this person initially went there to murder her, but they did. The iron could have also killed her, but I think they said that the stab wounds were what they assumed killed her. Though she was actually still dressed in her nightgown. Okay, so it appeared like she had been getting ready for bed, but it also appeared to police, I'm going to say, I guess, and to Mary, that she had let the person in. So much like Jane, there was no sign of forced entry. There was no windows broken. There was nothing like that. It appeared that even though she was getting ready for bed, she either knew her attacker and let this person in, or once again, this person presented themselves as a benevolent person and she felt comfortable enough to let them into her residence. It appeared like she let them in. They also felt that she was likely killed the night of the 5th. Now, unlike Jane, she had been sexually assaulted, guys. Even though she was still wearing her nightgown, she had obvious signs of sexual trauma, guys. She had been raped. It always makes me wonder, why the overkill, though? Why stab somebody 5 to 6 times and then beat them with an iron in the face and head? Did the killer have some type of vendetta against this person? This would also lead me to believe that he knew her. He was trying to disfigure her face. And generally, a stabbing is a pretty intimate thing. Just saying, not all of them. We know that. Not all beatings are intimate either. But you're staring the person in the face as you're doing this. It's more intimate. It also kind of seems like this person, we know the killer's a man, guys, sexual assault. So that the killer knew the person. And it does seem from the fact that he used weapons from her own home that maybe his initial motivation wasn't murder. I don't know. Her purse, of course, was also plundered, and her wallet was missing, just like in the case of Jane. So police in the community, super shocked. You have a community of 600 people and a police force that is not used to investigating murder, guys. At that point in time, we were all our own separate little municipalities. Chatham, Kent wasn't a thing. This was just Kent County. So Merlin would have, I don't know if they would have a police force just directly to themselves or use a neighboring one, but most other towns had their own police force. This is not something anybody on the force or anybody in the general public in the community around would be used to. They weren't used to violent crimes. The crimes they would be used to would be like breaking and entering, petty theft, vandalism, things like that. I don't even know if they'd be used to assaults. It was just small crimes. So a murder, especially one as shocking as this, was unheard of there. People were shocked. Now, it might seem like, because I'm sure you guys can see him, I can see him too, the links between the two cases. However, at this point in time, the police force down here did not contact London. London didn't contact them. So I don't know, guys, why. The people involved with investigating this crime would not really have been trained well for violent crimes. They also... they probably weren't trained to investigate murders very well. They weren't used to this. They had no idea. And you guys know at this point in time, jurisdiction matters. You know that one jurisdiction didn't necessarily like to share information with another. They wanted to be the one to solve the crime, etc., etc. They were loath to share any information. So for whatever reason, London police, Merlin police, they didn't connect these two crimes. Police in Kent County, like I said before, would not have had the resources or really the training to investigate this case properly. They really wouldn't have. They tried, but they bungled it. Evidence was tainted. The chain of command was not very good. They just did not investigate it the way it should have been investigated. Sorry, it took me a couple minutes to say it properly. However, I just want to keep pointing out that this was not a police force. This would be like a handful of people anyway. They don't know what they're doing. They've never seen a crime like that in Merlin. So it was not well investigated. It was blundered, let's just say. Also, I do want to point out, of course, police weren't used to murders in this town, but Edith was also fairly middle class too. So there would be more urgency to solve her case than there would have been for Jane's. So a person did come forward in the days that followed and claimed to have heard someone running from Edith's house that night, the night of the 5th or 6th, I think. No, it was the night of the 5th. Sorry, guys. Heard. Now, they didn't see this person. They only heard them. So, of course, this tip out nowhere. A tip was also called in saying, quote, a late model black and white car, end quote, was spotted leaving Edith's driveway. And this would have been also on the 5th. I don't know if it was morning or night, but it would have also been on the 5th. Police also ruled this out. They were able to rule out that this car was not involved in the crime. I'm not sure how, but I'm wondering if maybe somebody didn't see it on the 6th and it was like actually a police car. But regardless, the tip was ruled out. So They have nothing. They did search the village, of course, and didn't find anything of note either. Nothing that could help. In late September / early October, police were able to find Edith's empty wallet and some of her personal papers. And this would have been on Middle South Road. Middle South Road is a rural road. It's about 1.6 kilometers from Merlin. So it's on the outside of Merlin. And at this point in time, because it's on the outside, it's in the jurisdiction of the OPP. So now Ontario Provincial Police have come in and taken over Edith's case, which is probably for the best because the police force for Merlin and the surrounding area was not doing so well. They appealed, the OPP appealed to the public for any information anybody might have had on the murders, anybody coming forth. They hoped that somebody would remember seeing either a suspicious car or a suspicious person just walking along Middle South Road the 5th or the 6th. Okay, small rural area, guys. It's a village, so everybody knows everybody. You'd know if there was a strange car in the area. You'd know if there was a strange person. You would also know if you saw one of your neighbors acting strangely. Like if it, it's a rural road. At this point in time, they believed it was somebody connected to Merlin that had done the crime. Like I said before, this is a rural road. It's not really well known from people that did not know the area, let's just say. It would be known by people who knew the area, but not so much outsiders from the area. However, I do want to point out it is a road that's used. So it's possible somebody could have been eventually driving through town and just saw the road and was like, that's a good place to dump evidence. Also, I don't know how many houses are farm properties would be around the road. I'm not quite sure. But they appealed to the public asking if anybody had seen anybody suspicious on this stretch of road. Nothing came of it. Police believed in this case, this is so strange because in Jane's case, they believed it was rape and the murder and robbery happened afterwards. In this case, police believed that the motivation was robbery and that the rape and murder had been committed as an after fact. That's just what they believed. So we're going to leave that for a second. So just as planned, Gerald and Mary Archer moved to 203 Adelaide Street South in Chatham in October of 1970. So Gerald was approximately 39 and Mary would about 57. A lot of the times people start thinking about retirement at that age, but not Mary. She was still working. Once again, Gerald didn't have steady employment when he moved down to Chatham. He had some day labor jobs. That was it. He was more content to sit at home and let Mary fund his life. And he was increasingly drinking alcohol at this point in time too. I think he had always drank before, but it was more of an increase at this point in time. Whatever Mary couldn't provide, apparently welfare provided the rest for. At this point in time, like I said, he was drinking heavily and he was spending a good amount of his time at the various local taverns, pubs, hotels in and around the area. Now, by January of 1971, this is only about 3 months later, Gerald was actively spending every dime he made, he could get his hands on, or he could take from Mary at the local hotels and drinking establishments. He was heavily drinking at this point in time. So at this point in time, like I said, the trail to Edith's killer had gone cold. Once again, there was not a lot of evidence, guys. And what evidence they did have, to be honest with you, wasn't handled properly. It was tainted. You had a case mixed with tainted evidence that was then mixed with a disorganized investigation, coupled with the eventual involvement of more than one police force, because you have this force, you have the OPP, and I think there were a couple others that tried to help as well. It just didn't work out. And because of the bungled investigation, Edith's case went cold. But if Edith's case is cold, Jane's at this point positively Arctic. Nobody seemed to be investigating it. It was almost like she was forgotten. On January 22nd, 1971, Isabella Russell, better known around the town as Belva or sometimes Belle Russell, called into her job as a chambermaid at the Chatham Hotel. So we've talked about Chatham before, guys. Donny Club in the Donny Club case, and of course Lake and Ing, we also talked about Chatham too. But some of you already know that Chatham, Kent is my municipality. It's my home municipality. I'm from here. So that's another interesting aspect. I couldn't believe that this stuff happened in my municipality. It just doesn't happen. Things like this don't happen very often around here. They do happen, but not usually serial killers. So very interesting. So Chatham became a settlement actually before London, Ontario, the year before in 1792. It straddled the Thames River, so that was why. It was named after William Pitt. Makes sense, right? That was the hotel that Edith worked at. He was actually the first Earl of Chatham in England, and as such, he named Chatham after his earldom, earldom in Chatham. Sorry, guys. Some of you might know that one of the definitive battles of the War of 1812 was actually fought in Chatham, Kent. It was fought in Thamesville, which is just outside of Chatham. And that's where the Tecumseh Monument is too, guys. There's a monument to Tecumseh and a lot of information about the War of 1812 from just outside of Thamesville all the way down. You can see a lot of stuff. Chatham is also the northern terminus for the Underground Railroad. We've talked about that before too when we talked about Dresden. This was again in Donny Club. And as such, it's a part of the African Canadian Heritage Tour. It's a heritage tour site. Uncle Tom's Cabin is just outside of Dresden as well, guys. Another well-known site on the African Canadian Heritage Tour. Pizza, Hawaiian pizza, whether you like it or not, and I do like it, was actually invented in Chatham, Ontario. That's a little bit of trivia for you guys. And we have a lot of really famous sports people that come from Chatham. So Ken Houston, he came from Chatham. TJ Brody is from the area. Sean Schuschman, he's also from Chatham, Kent. So is Fergie Jenkins, baseball star Fergie Jenkins. He's actually from Chatham as well. African Canadian civil rights activist Hugh Burnett is from Chatham, Kent. He's actually from Dresden. And author Robertson Davies is also from Chatham, Kent, if that helps you guys. So we do have some people. So Belva lived at 43.5 Adelaide Street South. This actually wasn't that far from the Archers. They lived at 203, remember. She lived there with her common law partner. So she does have a partner. She does not live alone like the other two women. She does have a partner. And his name was Reginald Tomlinson. So at this point in time, Belva was 57. And she worked, like I said, as a chambermaid at the Chatham Hotel. She'd actually been at the Chatham Hotel for about 10 years at that point in time. So she was fairly well established there, guys. She'd worked there for quite some time. So even though she was recovering from the effects of the flu, remember she had called in and people had said she had the flu for a few days before then, she and Reg decided to go out that night. She and Reg had been together for approximately 3 years at this point in time. And that day on the 22nd, Reg had gone and picked up his paycheck. He worked as a taxi driver for Courtesy Cabs. Courtesy Cabs is still a company in Chatham, Ontario too, guys. He worked as a taxi driver and he went and picked up his pay. From there, the two of them went and bought groceries. They ran a few errands. And then, of course, at 6:30, they decided to go out for a drink. They stopped at a hotel called the Rankin Hotel. And at one point in time, which is also on King Street, guys, the Rankin Hotel at one point in time had actually been pretty upper class, I guess. It was known as one of the best establishments in the area. It's fallen on some hard times since then. And it's now actually home to Chatham's premier strip club, Spanky's. The Rankin, like I said, was on King Street, and it's actually not that far from the William Pitt Hotel. A few blocks. It's not that far. So at this point in time, Reg decided that he wanted to go home and change his clothes. I guess they were too work-esque for him. So he went home and he changed his clothes. He went home alone at this point in time, and he returned shortly afterwards. After his return, he and Belva then went to the Chatham Hotel, which is kind of strange to me because she'd called in sick. I'd be afraid to show up at my job if I'd called in sick because I know how mad they'd be. But anyway, they decided to drink at the Chatham Hotel for a little while. And this is located on 5th Street, which is about 2 minutes or so from the Rankin. They're all in the same approximate area. So they stayed at the hotel until about 11:30, just drinking and having fun at that point in time. Now, at some point after 11:30, Belva got up and left. I'm guessing this is something she must have often did because it didn't like super concern Reg at the time. He just managed to look up and Belva was gone. So it could have been that he was talking to a group of people and she was talking to a group of people. Regardless, he looked up and at about 11:30 or so, she was gone. Reg did look around the hotel for her. He couldn't find her, and he then went back to the Rankin and looked for her a little bit more. Now, like I said, I'm guessing it's some type of pattern. He didn't find her. He was not concerned at that point in time, and either due to the booze or due to hunger, he decided he was going to have something to eat at the Satellite Restaurant on King Street in Chatham. It's still open if you guys are interested. Belva at this point, though, had actually gone to the Merrill Hotel, which is also on King Street. Sorry, guys, they were all in the same general area. By that point, she got there, or she was there for sure, at around midnight on the 23rd, the early morning hours of January 23rd. A friend of hers named Hugh Smith saw her there, and he actually joined her in drinking. The two of them were drinking that night at this point in time. At some point in time, shortly after midnight, Belva got up to go to the bathroom, and it was then that she caught the eye, well, then that we know of anyway, of one Gerald Thomas Archer, who was also at the Merrill drinking that night. Archer then asked I don't fully understand this part of it, guys, so forgive me for it, but Archer apparently asked the hotel manager if he could go, quote, sit on the ladies' side, end quote, of the bar. I don't know if that means the side closest to the ladies' room. I don't think the bars were segregated by sex at that point. It's 1971. It seems really a fairly outdated concept by then. I can't tell you for sure. But anyway, that's what he asked, and I guess the hotel manager was like, okay. And he went to go sit on that side. Nevertheless, he went to that side of the bar, and he did sit by himself near the cigarette machine, just like creepily by himself drinking. William Bezzo, who was actually, or Bezzo, it's B-E-Z-Z-O, so Bezzo, who was actually a waiter at the hotel, saw Archer there drinking by himself at around closing time. And since his shift was over, he decided that he was going to go and have a drink with this man sitting by himself for last call. The two started talking, and the subject turned to Belva. So I'm going to guess they both knew her. It does seem that William probably knew her from the fact that she'd been in the establishment several times. It's still a small area, guys. And despite the fact that we call Chatham a city, I mean, population isn't huge. So they probably knew each other. And of course, Gerald Thomas Archer claimed to know her too, and he did know her name and everything. So Gerald told William that he, Gerald, had been born in London and had relocated to Chatham. He then said that he knew Belva Russell because he had dated her daughter. At this point in time, William asked Gerald why he wasn't like sitting with Belva, if they knew each other. And Gerald said he had, quote, tried to force her to do something, end quote. She resisted, and the two of them, quote, scuffled, end quote. He then added that if Belva didn't, quote, smarten up, end quote, he'd kill her. Now, he's telling William this, and William doesn't really react. He never warned Belva of the threat. I'm assuming he just thought it was all sweet, sweet drunk talk. I'm not sure. But regardless, he didn't tell Belva any of this. Although it would be valuable information later on. It seems to me, and I'm sure it seems to several of you at this point in time, that it would seem like Archer had been watching her. Maybe for a little while. He knew she'd be at the Merrill. I'm sure he knew of most of the places she went to. And it seems like he knows her, and he said that they had some type of argument at some point. At this point in time, of course, the hotel closed, and Belva was walked home by Hugh. Remember who's Hugh Smith? He walked her home to her second floor apartment. Now, this is 43 and a half Adelaide Street South. At that point in time, it was a duplex, guys. As far as I know, it was cut into 4, although it might have been 3. There were 2 bottom apartments and the top apartment or top apartments. It looks like the stairway that led to the top went around the back, and Belva was located in one of the upper apartments. That's why it's 43 and a half, is because she's located at the upper apartment. Hugh said that he stayed until he saw the light to her apartment go on, assumed she was home safe, and then he went home. So at 1:00 a.m., a woman named Myrtle Banks, who lived below Belva, she lived in one of the apartments on the first floor, decided she was going to go to bed. She wasn't going to go to sleep. She was going to relax with her radio for a little while, but at 1:00, she decided to go to bed. At 1:45 a.m., she heard angry voices coming from the vicinity of Belva and Reg's apartment. She knew one of the voices. She knew that it belonged to Belva. She could definitely tell it was Belva's voice. However, she heard an unknown male voice. This was not someone's voice who she knew, and it was definitely not Reg. Belva apparently shouted, quote, "Get down those stairs. I don't want you in this house," end quote, followed by the male voice, but she couldn't hear anything the male voice was saying. It just came out as like muffled sounds and like mumbling. That's what she said, it was mumbling. And she then heard several crashes and moving around. Or she then heard somebody moving around, or the sounds of something moving around. She then heard a huge crash. In fact, this crash was so huge that it actually shook her stovepipes in her room. She didn't call the police or anything at that point in time. I don't know, maybe she's used to hearing sounds like this. Myrtle then heard this mumbling, shuffling gait. That's what she described it as. A mumbling voice and a shuffling gait for approximately half an hour longer. So she started hearing it at 1:45. She heard it until about 2:15. And yeah, the times are important. That's why I'm mentioning it. So another downstairs neighbors, I believe he must have lived beside Myrtle. His name was Rick Blair, and he also heard the noises. Both he and Myrtle decided at this point in time to leave their apartments and go check things out. But they were doing it independently of each other. So as soon as Myrtle saw Rick leave his apartment, she was like, man, he can take care of it. Or he was a man, so she probably figured it was safer if he went and gone to check it out. So he went upstairs. Now, at this point in time, we're going to go back to Reg. It's 2:00 a.m. and around 2:00 a.m., Reg decides to call up a taxi cab and take it home. It would take approximately 15 minutes for him to get home from the satellite restaurant to Adelaide Street. So he arrived home at 2:15 a.m. on the 23rd. As soon as he got home and was walking to go up to his place, he spotted a stranger running. He said this person was running down the stairs from the upper level, right? That would lead to their apartments. Reg yelled out, quote, "What the hell is going on?" End quote. But the man didn't stop. In fact, the man barreled right into Reg and actually hit him on the chin, left a mark. And he didn't stop even after he ran into Reg. He just kept going after that. This is why I mentioned the times. It coincides with what Myrtle said, and it also alibis Reg, but at the same point in time, it coincides. She started hearing these noises at 1:45 and heard them for half an hour. He arrived home at 2:15. Now, after seeing the stranger fleeing and, not stopping after he barreled into him, Reg got super concerned and felt the need that he was scared for Belva, let's just say at this point. So Reg, of course, went upstairs and he entered the home that he shared with Belva, and Myrtle could hear him say, quote, "What in the hell? Belle, speak to me. Who did this to you?" End quote. At this point in time, Reg was in shock, I'm sure, and he exited the apartment and got Myrtle. He went downstairs and got Myrtle. I'm assuming he did this A, due to the shock, but B, because maybe he couldn't believe what he was seeing himself and he wanted a witness to confirm what he was seeing. Regardless, the two of them re-entered the apartment together. So they found Belva on her back with her arms outstretched on the dining room floor. She was naked from the waist down, and her like slip and girdle were pulled up over her chest area, over her bosom. Much like with Jane Woolley, or I should say her sweater and slip, sorry, it was her sweater and slip were pulled up to expose her bosom. Now, much like with Jane, her like girdle and her nylons and things like that were found about 6 feet from her body behind the living room door. Her body was actually still warm to the touch, but she was most definitely dead. And at this point in time, Reg, very distraught, asks Myrtle to please call police, ambulance, and fire. At that point in time, there's no 911, so you have to call each division directly. Belva, of course, had severe head trauma. She had definitely been beaten, and she had several other marks and wounds on her body. To police, it appeared that the crime was sexually motivated. And it also seemed, much like with Edith, that Belva was getting ready for bed as she was attacked. Once again, there was no sign of forced entry, so it appeared that Belva, in those very few short minutes that she was home, so I'm still not quite sure of this, but it appeared that she had let this person into her home. However, police did get lucky at this crime scene. They found fingerprints on a piece of broken glass, which I believe was actually from like a drinking glass, and also on the door frame, the kitchen door frame. And they also had Reg, who had actually seen this strange man running from his apartment, and could give a description. The description was good enough that they could actually generate a composite. So at this point in time, they had more to go on than everybody else. So Belva's autopsy, of course, was performed later on the 23rd. It was approximated that she died at about 2 o'clock, which would make sense. Her body was so warm when Reg found it. And of course, it coincides with the noises that Rick and Myrtle heard. And it was probable that she actually didn't die from the wounds given to her, but died from the shock of being attacked. That's what they figure actually killed her. They believed that the other marks and wounds she had were due to the fact that she had fallen several times, probably most likely in the attack. Like she had been thrown to the ground, or like, if she had been hit in the face, she fell back and the person pulled her back up, or she was able to get back up and she was beaten down again. So at this point in time, police actually told the public that Belva's murder and Edith's murder were in no way connected. It's not because they didn't believe them to be connected. It's actually because they didn't want the public thinking that there was a serial killer loose in Kent County or Chatham. So they told the public that. But they also didn't have a whole lot of evidence either, and they wanted to see if someone could come forward, so they were trying to be tight-lipped also about it. So the composite was then released on February 9th of 1970, and it described a white male, I'm going to get this direct for you guys, between 5'8" and 5'10". He's approximately 160 pounds, and he had short, light-colored hair, and Reg believed that he had a bad, maybe like lazy or spaggy, I'm not quite sure, left eye. Could have also been, maybe he hit Reg's chin with his face, maybe, I don't know. Reg said he figured the man was between 40 and 45 years old, and police then said Belva and her killer, they released it to the public, had, quote, been in contact, end quote, at the Merrill shortly before her murder. So hundreds of tips started flooding in. This case received a lot more attention than the other two. Hundreds of leads started coming in. And on February 12th, police were able to obtain a search warrant to search 203 Adelaide Street South. And of course, we know that's where the Archers reside. This was due to Mr. Archer's close proximity to the crime scene. They're not that far away. It's on the same street, and the fact that he had a criminal record. So they wanted to go talk to him. At this point in time, they weren't completely sure. I don't think they had, that much of an inkling, but it was, no, I think they had an inkling. They knew that Archer drank at the Merrill. They probably had the testimony of William Bezos that said if she didn't smarten up, that Gerald Thomas Archer was going to kill her. So they were able to get their search warrant. So police did actually find a piece of evidence, a blood-stained shirt at the residence. Both Mary and Archer claimed that the blood on the shirt was from them. Both Mary. So Mary is alibying him. This is really interesting to me at this point. And you'll see why in a little bit. But very interesting. She knows what time he got home. But anyway. She fully said that the blood stain on the shirt was either from her or Mr. Archer, Gerald Thomas Archer, because they both got frequent nosebleeds. It was almost like they were trying to tell the cops to ignore it. But the police thought better of it and bagged it as evidence. And of course, at this point in time, they brought Gerald down for questioning. They also called in Reg, and a police lineup was done with Archer in it. And of course, Reg ID'd him immediately as the person running from the apartment that night. The shirt was blood typed. You guys already know there's no DNA at this point in time. It's 1971. All they could do was blood type things. And of course, when we're talking about blood typing, figure out the blood groups. So A, B, O, AB. Of course, you have positive and negative on it as well. And they found that the blood on the shirt belonged to the A group. I believe it was A negative. Don't quote me on that, guys, but I know it belonged to the the A blood group. And interestingly enough, yes, that matched Gerald Thomas Archer. His blood group was A, but so was Belva Russell's. So he was officially arrested for murder on February 18th. Of 1971, and this was during a day when he just happened to be at work. He was day laboring for sorry guys, the Ontario Highway Department, and it was just when he sat down for lunch that they arrested him too, but they did get him at that point in time. So at trial, it was found that the fingerprints that were on the glass and on the kitchen door frame matched Gerald Thomas Archer. They also had William Bezos come and testify to the conversation they had. And of course, they had Reg come up and testify that he had seen a man who looked like Archer running away, right, from the apartment that night. Gerald took the stand, and he claimed that the conversation between him and William Bezos never happened. He denied it. He said that his prints were on Belva's, like, this piece of glass and the doorway because he had gone to see her a couple days before to bring her some whiskey because he had heard that she had the flu and he wanted to make sure that she was okay. He claims he called Belva up and told her he was coming to visit, and that she said it was okay as long as he left before 8 p.m. Okay, so he then said that Belva's own son-in-law, a man named Rich Carson, had actually driven him there the couple days prior. Rich was able to verify that fact. So the two of them definitely did know each other. And I'm guessing if they really did have some type of argument or whatever, the one that Archer described to William Bezos, it was probably during that point in time. Like I said, Rich backed up the account and said that yes, he did drive Gerald Thomas Archer to his mother-in-law's home, but he said that Rich said that he left as soon as Gerald got up to the front door. Another reason why he could have gone visiting, though, was to case out the scene, right? I just get the feeling he was watching Belva for a while. He seems to know her anyway. It is possible he dated her daughter, which would be weird because would that be the woman that Rich was married to? Sorry, these weird things come across my mind when I'm reading this stuff. But regardless, it does appear like he knew her and knew her well enough, but it does also look like he was stalking her or trying to figure out a way to get in and out of the house or trying to figure out her movements as well. Probably he's also looking for a time when Reginald wasn't going to be home too. Gerald then said that Belva, on that day when he went to go visit her, poured them each a drink. But as soon as she gave him his drink, she felt dizzy and went to go lay down in her bed. And at that point in time, Gerald Archer left. He said that he never even sat down in her house, but that's why his fingerprints would be on the door frame and on the glass. He said that he went right home after a night of drinking at the Merrill on the 22nd. Right home. And he also said that, yes, he had heard Belva had been murdered, but he decided not to go back to those drinking establishments. So probably the Chatham, the Merrill, the William Pitt, all of that. He decided not to go back to the Rankin. He decided not to go back to those drinking establishments because he didn't want people to finger him as a suspect because he knew Belva, I guess. He then went on to say that Mary, his wife, did not go with him when he went out drinking at the hotels because, quote, she wouldn't be caught dead in one, end quote. So Mary, oh, Mary, you kind of have this, she must have had some idea. God. Anyway, she testified that Gerald got home at about 1:30, which would refute Myrtle and 1:45, if you guys remember, and probably Rick Blair too. And she said that, yes, he was really, really drunk. He was like 10 sheets to the wind or whatever. She said the reason why she knew the time was 1:30 is because both the clock in the kitchen and in the bedroom said that it was 1:30. It just really seems like she's trying to alibi him. I don't know. Like she had time to think of this, but anyway. It is possible, though, that maybe she didn't think that he had that level of violence in him. It doesn't seem like they had a violent marriage or anything. It seems like the marriage was pretty good. But regardless, she was giving the man an alibi. It doesn't really matter, though, because the Crown figured that Gerald Thomas Archer saw Belva at the Merrill and followed her home to rape her. Remember, they still believe rape was the motivation. They figured he tried to rape her around 2 a.m. and, of course, couldn't perform, like Jane's, kind of, and that Belva died from the injuries he gave her due to the fact that he more than likely couldn't perform. In fact, they said, quote, Belva died from the injuries sustained during the attempt, end quote, the rape attempt. So a jury of 12, of course, did not believe Gerald Thomas Archer and declared him guilty after 3.5 hours of deliberations. He was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole. They never said what degree of murder he was charged with, even though clearly he knew her. Clearly he had been at her house before, And I feel that this is a type of premeditation because he told William Bezos that if she didn't smarten up, he would kill her. Regardless, it seems like it was second-degree murder that he got. They usually don't parole first-degree murderers that easily. It's usually 25 years indefinitely. Sometimes you might only serve 22, but regardless. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. As he was leaving court, and this was in the presence of his wife and several of the officers that were like taking him to actual prison, he said, quote, "That's not the end of the ball game. That's just the first strike," end quote. And at this point in time, people were puzzled about that comment for a very long time. It will make sense to you soon. So Archer, of course, did try to appeal his sentence in 1972, but that didn't work. However, incredibly enough, he was actually paroled in 1985, only 14 years after the murder. Sorry, guys. Lola. Only 14 years after the murder. Which, once again, leads me to believe that it was probably second-degree murder. He didn't have a violent criminal record before then. And this appeared to be his first murder, but regardless. Gerald, by that time, was estranged from Mary. I don't believe the two of them ever divorced. They were just described as estranged. So he spent the rest of his life just drifting. He became a drifter, and he drifted through all the towns around southwestern Ontario, probably much like he had done before. Not murdering, but just drifting, visiting some of the places he had been to. He died sometime in 1995. Not quite sure when of that either. When he was about 62 or 63 from a heart attack, from an apparent heart attack. That's what they said. 2 years later, in 1997, so yeah, you'd think the story ended there, but it didn't. Approximately 2 years later, in 1997, a task force nicknamed, sorry guys, a task force nicknamed Project Angel was formed to investigate southwestern Ontario's cold cases, and to try to bring closure to them. It's 1997. We have DNA. We have things that will help us out with that. So they figured it was time to try to close some of these cases. At around this time, Mary and her daughter, this is why I said there was at least one daughter, decided to contact police and tell them the story. However, I want to point out that they would have known he was dead. They waited until 2 years after he was dead and until this project started. I still don't know what the motivators were that they would come forward with, but regardless, they did do this. They went to the police and said, I don't know, maybe they'd heard of the task force in the newspaper, but anyway, they went to the police and told them a story that said, and this was 27 years after his conviction for Belva Russell's murder, but anyways, and 28 years after the death of Edith Authier. He said that one night Gerald got, or she said that one night, and the daughter said too, Gerald got incredibly drunk and confessed to the murder of Edith Authier in Merlin. This was back when they were both living in Merlin. However, because he was drunk, Belva and her daughter just brushed it off as drunk speak and didn't mention it again until they eventually gave this tip to police. Part of you wonders why Mary didn't put two and two together. There's a dead person in Chatham. He's definitely killed. There's a dead person in Merlin during the time that they lived there. It's somebody that appears to have been known to him that also worked as a chambermaid. Yet she waits. She alibied him for the shirt. She tried to alibi him for the night of the 22nd. And yet she waits 2 years until after he was dead. I don't know. Maybe she really, really, really loved him. I don't know. But anyway, regardless, she reported this. Oddly enough, though, she was able to ascertain at this point in time that Gerald Thomas Archer had been one of the original suspects in Edith's murder, but police didn't have any evidence, so they weren't able to charge him. In the year 2000, Gerald's body was actually exhumed. As far as I know, he's in a pauper's grave somewhere, guys, to collect tissue samples and DNA just to test it against cold cases, right? At this point in time, they specifically wanted to compare it to Edith's crime scene. We'll get into that just a minute. At this point, due to the similarities in Edith's case and Belva's case, police pretty much figured they were linked. But they were also looking into other old, cold Southwestern Ontario cases that had kind of like the same signature to them. And that's when they came across Jane Woolley's. And they were able to note the similarities in between, or in all three of them. No forced entry, various states of undress, right? Either attempted or full-on sexual assault. The emptying of the purses. How there was no real evidence laying around. How this person was able to get in and out without people noticing, except for on the last night, of course, when Reg just happened to be coming home at that point in time. The fact that they were all on the floor, on their backs, the fact that they had been beaten, things of that nature. These crime scenes look really, really similar. So they decided that they were going to add Jane's case in as well. And also the fact of their ages, 57, 57, 62. All three of them were chambermaids at various hotels that it would appear Gerald Thomas Archer was at least acquainted with. It all made sense. So police decided to test the DNA that they got from Gerald Thomas Archer's body with the cigarette butts from Jane Woolley's house. And wouldn't you know it, they come up with a positive match. Definitively, Gerald Thomas Archer then for sure became the entity known as the London Chambermaid Slayer, the London Chambermaid Murderer, or more aptly, the Chambermaid Slayer. Now, due to the mishandling of the evidence from Edith's case, it was tainted, so they couldn't test anything DNA. I'm going to guess it was semen, but they couldn't test it, right, because it was tainted. The victim types, Edith's case was definitively linked to him because the MOs, the victim types, the signatures he left behind, all of that stuff was almost the exact same as Jane's case and resembled Belva's. So that's why they were able to link all three of them together. And of course, Gerald Thomas Archer became known as the serial killer he was. I'd also like to point out, remember what he said, that's only one strike. 2 would have been Edith. 3 would have been, of course, Jane. That's the ball game. That's what he meant when he was saying that. Archer's name, of course, wasn't released to the public at that point in time. In fact, apparently we had a rule, I don't know if it's still in existence, I'm sorry guys, I didn't actually look that up, that said a person had to be dead at least 30 years. A suspect had to be dead at least 30 years before they could be named. I don't know why, because you would think they'd immediately want to give family closure, and the perpetrator's dead anyway, but regardless, at that point in time, it was supposed to be 30 years. However, they dropped hints to the public, so the public was able to, know for sure who it was. They said that he had killed somebody in southwestern Ontario in 1971, and had been convicted of murder for that. And they also told people he died in 1995, so people we're pretty sure it was Archer. Plus, I mean, Mary was still alive. I'm sure she told people. So after 30 plus years, like I said, the ID of the person responsible for killing Edith, a chambermaid. In Merlin, the person responsible for killing Jane, a chambermaid in London, and the person responsible for killing Belva, a chambermaid in Chatham, was finally ID'd, and he was a bona fide serial killer. And that's it, guys. That's the whole Gerald Thomas Archer saga. I'm sorry I don't know more. If we knew more about his childhood or his life before he married Mary, or even their married life, guys. Maybe we could come up with some type of motivation for this. As far as I know, he was never diagnosed with anything in jail or in prison. I don't really know that he is classified as a sexual sadist. I'm not really sure. But what do you guys think? To me, it seems he either knew or stalked the women he attacked. So police at the time of the murders, in order to learn their habits. So police at the time of the murders believed the victims knew the perpetrator to some extent, either by sight, by name, had some type of acquaintanceship with him, or that he was pretending he was a trustworthy person. London police chief at that time, Jim Balmain, said, quote, he met them in bars, probably. They were all cleaning type ladies in hotels, and he moved around, so he knew all of them, end quote. So either, like in the case of Edith, she wasn't known to drink after work, but he may have known her from being in the William Pitt Hotel, knowing that she worked there as a chambermaid. So it makes sense. What do you guys make of his victim choice? Why older chambermaids specifically? Why older women who worked as maids in hotels? Why them? Why women that he knew, would be alone at some point in time or lived alone? I'm saying he definitely stalked Belva. He must have known about Reg, and he wanted to see. He knew Reg was a taxi driver. I'm guessing more than likely too. So he'd know when he'd been around. I don't know. I don't know. That's conjecture on my part. Could he have attacked them because he hated women? Maybe he hated his mother. Maybe he attacked them because they resembled his mother. Maybe he attacked them because they resembled Mary. Mary was around 57 at that time, in her mid-50s, 56, 57. Two of his victims were 57 and one was 62. They were distinctly middle-aged. Mary would have been too. Did he resent Mary, maybe unconsciously, for being the breadwinner? Did he feel emasculated by her? It's also, sorry, Lola's going nuts. It's also interesting to note that he, as far as we know anyway, he was never linked to anybody else, but he didn't start killing until after he married his wife. Was he projecting Mary onto them? It's very interesting. That, to me, that almost seems like what he was doing. Maybe he felt emasculated by Mary. Maybe that's why he couldn't perform. Either that or he was drunk. Because these people resembled Mary, maybe he felt emasculated by her, and so he took his rage at Mary out on them. I don't know. Who's to say for sure? But at the same point in time, she confounds me. Was he the love of her life? I mean, she does seem, it does look like she definitely took care of him. She stuck by his side through the trial. I don't know when they became officially estranged, but she stuck by his side. She tried to give him an alibi, saying that for sure he was home at 1:30. There was no way he could have killed her at 2 if he was home at 1:30. And she looked at the clock, so she saw it. She tried to say that the blood stain on the shirt was from either her or his nosebleed. And she wouldn't come forward with the information she had until 2 years after his death. As his wife, even if they were estranged, they would have still notified her. So very interesting. What do you guys make of it? What do you guys make of the story? Do any of you know any more of the Gerald Thomas Archer story? If you do, let me know. But for today, that's all we have time for, guys. I'm so glad to be back. I hope to see you guys again next week. I hope you guys all do well. Bye for now, guys.